Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you're joining from. Welcome to this session, this community consultation on the next phase of the knowledge platform on security and rule of law. My name is Sweta Velpillai. I am a senior advisor at Conducive Space for Peace and one of the advisory committee members of the platform. My fellow advisory committee members are also here with me today. We have Lisa Denny, we have Fulka Deventer, we have Graham Simpson, Leanne Kay. Am I missing anyone else? I think I've got everyone. This is a fairly large Zoom frame. And I'm also joined here today by Mariska von Beinum, Klingendahl's Conflict Research Unit, Marco Langhorst of International Development Law Organization, and Madeline Church from Safer World, who represent the consortium that manages the Knowledge Platform's Secretariat, as well as Megan Price, the head of office for the Secretariat. We, as a platform, are at a point where a new iteration of the Knowledge Platform on Security and Rule of Law will be launched next year in 2021. In light of that, the objective of this particular session is to really consult with the Security and Rule of Law community, to consult with you all, to try and understand what is relevant to you, and to listen to you as a platform, as a secretariat, as advisory committee members, and to incorporate your thinking into what the platform should offer, how it should work in the next phase. Now, the platform was really set up to try and shape our understanding and the approaches in security and rule of law, in conflict-affected settings and in fragile settings, to influence and innovate both policy and implementation, and to try and facilitate mutual learning. In that sense, the platform very much serves as a knowledge broker, sort of a network weaver, and a source of knowledge generator. And it also tries to really generate knowledge and uptake of that knowledge, which is a big part of what we would like to discuss with you all today. So this session is really a helpful step in trying to define how to best meet these aspirations and objectives. Now, the format we have for the next 70 or so minutes is to really try and keep it as interactive as possible. We will not have any presentation per se. We'll try and go into a couple of breakout groups depending on how big the group is going to be, but we will have a brief input from the consortium partners on where we are on developing our thinking, on the next iteration of the platform, what it could and should potentially look like. Before I go any further, a couple of housekeeping rules. As you will see, you're all, I believe, on mute. When you do want to speak, I kindly ask you to use the raise hand function. And once you're called upon, you can unmute yourself and speak. I also encourage you to use the chat function, especially if you have not been able to share your ideas and insights, but not limited just to that. Please feel free to use the chat function. And please also note that the sessions, both here in the plenary, but also when we go into breakout groups, if we do, the sessions are being recorded, and I hope that is okay with you. To get us started, before we sort of bring you up to speed on the current thinking within the platform and at the Secretariat on how the next version, next phase of the platform could look like, I would like you all to first share your thoughts, what you think should be the focus of the next iteration of the platform. What do you think we should place emphasis on? as we move forward, what issues are pertinent to the security and rule of law community that you think the platform should include and explore. Now, I am going to share a link in the chat box below, and that should take you to a Mentimeter page. And I would like you to just throw in a couple of words that you think is important to you. So there you go. If you could click on that link and share just 1 or 2 words to express your thoughts on what should be the focus. And we'll see what that comes up with. Let's see. So I'm going to share my screen so that you can see what is being shared. That's interesting. Embassy engagement, persistent challenges, cross-sector learning, COVID recovery, which is an issue that keeps coming up, localization, the interconnection between localization and what does that mean within the security and rule of law community, dealing with uncertainty, certainly. How do we innovate around policy, rising populism, safe spaces to fail, certainly something that we should take into account when we are talking about innovation and learning. How do we create the right environment for that? Learning platforms, certainly. Influencing networks, measuring data. MFA's lessons policies. I'm really curious to hear what that is. I'm sure that'll come up in some of those smaller discussions that we are going to be having. This is extremely interesting, and it's nice to see that all of our priorities sort of align towards some of the persistent challenges that we experience when it comes to learning and innovation around learning and policy uptake. That's certainly an interesting one. Great. Thank you so much for sharing that with all of us. Now, I'm going to take us to, I would now like to hand over to our consortium partners, Mariska, Marco, and Madeline, to tell us a little about where we are in our current thinking, but also to share the key questions that you would like us to discuss with the community in the next hour or so. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Sveta. And thank you all for joining. It's great to see there's actually still people in the waiting room, I see. So the group is still growing. For us, this is a very important opportunity, of course, to pick the brains of the community of the platform. In normal settings, we would, of course, have used the quote-unquote normal annual conference, bumping into everyone and picking brains left and right. We have to make do with the situation that we have, but it's fantastic that we can do it in this session. So we're very much looking forward to that. I will give you a very, very brief walkthrough in terms of the process that we have been through so far so that you understand where we are coming from. And then Marco and Madeline will take you through a little bit more in terms of content, what our thinking is, and specifically where we're hoping to get your input today. So in terms of the process, we are now, as Sveta said, in the 4th and final year of the current iteration of the Knowledge Platform, which is in fact the 2nd iteration. The whole thing started back in 2012. So we have quite some learning under our belt, so to say, but we continue to learn. taking into account some of those insights and how the platform has been evolving, we started the process of thinking about what would the next iteration look like quite early this year, on the back of the midterm review that was finalized at the beginning of this year. So we had a consultation with the community on that provided us with some first inputs and ideas in terms of where do we see the platform moving. What was interesting back then was that there was a lot of emphasis on learning, and specifically, and we'd seen that also in the way that that our activities had been evolving, learning at the, let's say, the more programmatic and operational levels. And so that for us was a good starting point, and we've taken that forward in our further thinking. And it was also a good starting point for the MFA, who of course was involved in those discussions as well, because we were, the current contract we have won through a tender procedure. And of course it was a little bit up in the air still, whether or not we would be the actual consortium taking this forward. So in all the consultations, we'd made sure that, that the MFA was involved as well, so that they took that forward in their thinking as well in terms of how they put the assignments out to the market. There was an expression of interest that was posted through the procurement agency of the Dutch government, that was posted, I think it was in June or July, I can't actually recall, to which we, of course, enthusiastically applied that we were still interested in taking the platform forward. As it turned out, we were the only ones who were interested in taking that on, which could either be an enormous vote of confidence in terms of the consortium and how we have been doing, or as Megan said it, maybe no one wants to take on this this daunting job. Either way, we were happy with the outcome, and it meant that we could move forward with the MFA to go through a number of brainstorming sessions with all the ideas that we had gathered from the community, but also our own lessons learned, both on the side of the MFA and ourselves. That was a series of brainstorming sessions that looked into some of our initial ideas, some questions that the MFA had in terms of could we incorporate certain things in the platform, how did we feel about it? And on the basis of that, the MFA then put together an assignment that is currently on our plates to come up with a proposal that will have to go through the normal vetting procedure, so to say. We are in the midst of proposal writing at the moment, so the timing to be able to pick your brains is perfect for us. We will need to submit a full proposal by the 1st of November, and we will take into account, of course, everything that we hear and learn today. We will also have the opportunity to have a more in-depth discussion with our advisory committee next week. And on the basis of that, we will put forward our proposal to the MFA that then hopefully will form the basis for a new 4-year iteration of the platform. We will, of course, summarize, let's say, the highlights of the final proposal and how we see the 4-year plan for the platform to share with all of you. But for now, our focus is very much on gathering the ideas during this session so that we can take it.
Mariska, you've been muted. If you can try again. Mariska, you've been muted. If you can unmute yourself. Thank you. I think we lost maybe 10 seconds.
Okay, well, it was probably not the most important 10 seconds. I was basically saying we're very much looking forward to this opportunity to feed into the finalization of our proposal. And as I said, in terms of the content, I'd like to hand over to Marco first to share a little bit more about what it is that we are thinking. Thank you so much.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Nice to see that we now have 30 people with us in the room. Thank you for making yourself available. in a moment, we'll go out into, well, perhaps into breakout rooms, or we'll start the discussion anyway. Okay, and one of the two main points that we would like to discuss with you, and that we're very much hoping to have your input on as we design the next phase of the knowledge platform, as Mariska said, is on our understanding of the concept of learning in general. It's a very big something that I'm dropping on your plate. But learning is obviously important to us in two respects. The platform itself has been set up to stimulate learning within the security and rule of law community with a view to improving the quality and impact of programming and policy making. But learning has also been very much a point of attention for the Secretariat and for the consortium partners, and in our discussions with the advisory committee. So our own learning about how learning actually takes place, what it entails, and what that means for how the platform can best stimulate learning among the different practitioner organizations, policymaking side, etc. So in our work through the practice labs that we've had, through the MTR and the various consultations, we see that in this sort of process to stimulate learning, there's quite a few obstacles. So how do you create conditions for learning to happen within an individual program? How do you create conditions for learning to happen within an organization that manages several programs? How do you facilitate learning to happen between different organizations? That may be both practitioners but don't have aligned interest, or between policymakers and practitioners. And one of the key questions also is, so if there is knowledge, if there is experience being exchanged, how do you actually make sure that it is then being fed back into programming? So exchanging knowledge is one step, but making sure that it gets taken up, as we have, as we usually talk about it, is another thing yet again. So in this mix, what the knowledge platform does primarily two things. It's about nurturing our network, making it more vibrant and stronger, creating extra points for people to connect and to exchange ideas. And we very much realize also that knowledge is generated in creating those spaces for exchange. And we focus on fostering what we call a learning environment. So that is where the Secretariat brokers knowledge. It tries to proactively connect the supply and demand of knowledge and experience. We create opportunities for organizations to invest in learning through the Knowledge Management Fund, through the cross-programmatic learning that Madeline will speak to you about in a moment. And it is by supporting the development of an implementation of knowledge agendas that I hope perhaps at the end of our talk we may also still address. But still, we're keenly aware that there are, so beyond what we can do, many challenges and perhaps also opportunities, many factors that influence the learning that goes on in the network, and many obstacles to that. So there's things that may be internal to organizations, the learning culture, the processes that are in place, the extent to which leadership has commitment to learning, prioritizes it. There are many external factors that influence learning, for example, for programming organizations, whether they have room within their budget and their HR set up to facilitate that. And so what we would like to ask you in the discussion that will follow is to give us all your thoughts on how the next iteration of the knowledge platform can well, help as much as possible, facilitate as much as possible the learning within organizations, between organizations, and especially also the uptake of knowledge back into programming and into policymaking. Thank you. I think I hand over to Madeline. Yes.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Madeline from SaferWorld. I'm one of the consortium partners, and I just wanted to highlight the other set of kind of issues that we wanted to raise in this consultation today. I think one of the things that we have learned over the last several years, including this and the previous iteration of the knowledge platform, is that where there tend to be less obvious ways to both surface and use learning and knowledge is where is at the programmatic level. I think that we have been very aware that, and particularly through the experience of trying to facilitate the global learning agenda on the Addressing Root Causes of Conflict Fund, the kind of the ability of all parts of this community to actually access and use learning and knowledge coming out of security and rule of law programs, be that through practitioner knowledge coming out of evaluations, is quite limited by quite a lot of aspects of the way in which our sector is set up. And that in the new iteration of the platform, we will be in a position where there's the knowledge management fund, which is intended to stimulate some of that learning and knowledge uptake. We also know that the kind of big raft of research funding through the NVO VOTRO scheme is coming to an end. And we're wondering where we might want to try and plug that gap to some extent to facilitate that programmatic learning. And in particular, we know that people are learning within their organizations in different ways, but what we think is kind of the missing link is a cross-programmatic mechanism to really facilitate that knowledge sharing across programmatic portfolios or consortia, or indeed just organizations that are running separate sort of funding streams. And so the thing we're interested in here is what mechanisms we think work and people have experience of to facilitate that cross-programmatic learning, and where you think the knowledge platform could play a role in that into the next iteration. And so those are the two questions about that aspect. I don't want to take up any more time. I want us to get into the discussions around the key topics, because this is a consultation with you. So without further ado, Megan, why don't you tell us how we're going to manage this with the breakout rooms?
Sure. Okay, so I believe we'll now break out into, I think we're going to have time for 30 minutes. So there are two main questions that each group will look to tackle. Each group will be led by one of the speakers that would just gave the presentation. One question will be, how can the platform facilitate greater learning and uptake of knowledge? What are the obstacles that the community encounters in the processes of knowledge uptake, and where can the platform help? So we'll spend about 15 minutes on that question. The second question we'd like the groups to address is, does the community have examples of initiatives or instruments that are already existing elsewhere that can help us focus on facilitating cross-programmatic learning, and that we could learn from these? Are there best practices out there that we should be aware of? So harvesting a little bit of wisdom from the group. So we'll spend about 15 minutes on either of those questions, and you will be led by our speakers. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the groups now, and we will see you all in about 30 minutes. Just give me 1 second.
I see we're all back in the big frame. I hope you all had a very interesting conversation in your breakout groups. What we would like to do now for perhaps the next few minutes, couple of minutes maybe, is to each group maybe share some of the big points that stood out for you during your discussion in either of the two questions. I don't want to sort of point and say you speak now, but if there are any volunteers that would like to sort of raise your hand, and then I will call you to unmute yourself and perhaps share some observations from your group. Mariska.
As someone has to get things started, as always. I know there were, I have lots of notes here. There were, I think, a number of very interesting things coming up. Maybe one that I think is interesting to think about more was the idea or I think the call to say, you know, one of the things that you could focus on as a cross-cutting theme or something that at the operational level is something that organizations run into and also relevant for donors is conflict sensitivity. And to really then sort of build around how our organization tackling that operationally, but then you could also switch that around to say, what is it that donors should, I don't know, create in terms of an enabling environment to work on that and to build a learning agenda around that. I think one of the other things was on the back of that to think about how we can support not only the ministry but also ourselves in terms of saying what are our key learning questions to move forward on. And maybe I should stop there. I have a long list, but I think that was one thing I take from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariska.
So there were two things that strike me. One was on exchanging learning across programs, was on what I think was called fail fairs, but I've heard different varieties of it. So really creating as the knowledge platform a safe space where lessons could learn of things that actually went wrong, and then the knowledge platform should be, there were also some advice given to the knowledge platform in terms of you should then be very careful about the power balances in the room, and so that this exchange can really be done in a good way, or even you might think of sending in anonymous cases or something, so that it kind of loses the edge. But of course, that does kind of is a trade-off with the quality of the case and how much in depth you can go. And another one, and I think Elena can explain this way better than I can, but it was what I understood knowledge platform as also sort of a matchmaker almost between organizations where where one organization indicates its interest to have on a trajectory to exchange knowledge with another organization or with a different type of knowledge. And but Elena, maybe you can explain this a bit more. But I thought that was an interesting idea as well.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to comment. So just very briefly, this is an experience with providing support on conflict sensitivity to grantees of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And this is something International Alert has been doing in the past couple of years. What we have found working quite well is when we work with an organization that expresses interest to strengthen their systems in conflict sensitivity and increase their learning, and we have used an accompaniment model whereby we follow up a specific project, come in, facilitate training and learning sessions with the organization, provide technical support to adapt specific tools, for example, M&E tools to capture conflict sensitivity indicators, and then come back to them in a few months' time to really pick things up where we left them and facilitate this reflection process. So I was happy to just give this as an example of accompaniment as a way of supporting organizational learning.
Yeah, it's nice. You, Elena. It's nice because it relates to both questions, right? On the one hand, on how that uptake can be improved by having a time element in there. And on the other hand, of course, the improvement.
Great. Marco, I saw your hand go up earlier.
Yeah, my physical hand, because that's one of my frustrations with Zoom, that I never figure out where the hand button is, but sorry about that. So Chris and Elena were both in my session, so they indeed covered two important points that were raised. Another thing that I noted was we reflected a bit on the ARC learning groups. There the observation was made that those were very useful. They were very useful to generate new knowledge by having different organizations exchange. They were also useful in the sense that then within the organizations concerned, that triggered new learning and uptake. But the critique perhaps was that they were very much headquarters focused. And so that made it difficult for the people actually implementing the programs on the ground often to participate directly in these learning groups, and somehow that lessened perhaps the results of the approach. So there was a call to ensure that similar things will be undertaken rather or also at field level or perhaps at regional level. Two further points on that. One, that if you do it at field level, then there is an argument to be made not to focus it on an individual program like ARC, but rather to combine different programs, because in a given setting like Burundi, the example was made, there may be several of those programs with similar type problems being implemented at the same time, and it'd be useful for those to exchange. And the other point that was made was that it would be useful not just to create spaces for exchange, but perhaps also to have facilities like the KMF stand alongside of that to allow for investments in specific questions that are raised during those groups. So that and then important points were made by others on let's say the value of the platform for stimulating learning for the sake more of learning than for accountability purposes, which I think is obviously a very important point, and the distinction that needs to be made between learning that starts with individuals and how organizations actually facilitate and stimulate learning, and what processes and tools are in place and what the platform can do to help bring those about. Thanks, Sveta. It was a very interesting discussion.
Thank you. It was definitely a very rich discussion, I think, in all the groups, and we've taken notes and we've recorded the session as well. So certainly it's something that the Secretariat will be processing later on in influencing how we move forward. I noticed that we have about 10 minutes left. Is that right? Different time zones? Yes, it is 10 minutes. So I would like to use.
Could I just add one last thing from the group that we were in? I think one of the things that came out quite strongly in the focus and discussion around the cross-programmatic learning, and the kind of good examples of practice. I think one of the things that was highlighted from a couple of the colleagues was just making sure that that doesn't become an exclusive instrument for, you know, if it's focused around big portfolios and it's focused around multi-annual funding streams, that, and then you think around how you might bring in a learning partner or use that programmatic learning instrument, that it doesn't become a more and more exclusive instrument where you're kind of effectively squeezing out smaller organizations or organizations that don't have grants in those larger instruments like the ARC Fund or the Power of Voices. And I think there was one, there's a kind of suggestion that you might want to think about that as potentially a consortia of smaller organizations could also play that role as learning partners for a bigger consortia, so that you're splitting up some of the resources which we all know everybody needs into smaller packets, so that you're you're not fundamentally prioritizing all the big organizations all over again. And that therefore concentrating and kind of making the kind of reinforcing exclusivity. I think that's one of the things that was really important.
Great, thanks, Madeline. I think it's an important to keep in mind that we're not creating further silos or squeezing down the organizations even further through these new mechanisms. Right, 7 minutes to go. I would like us to use the remaining time to think about one more thing. One of the things that the platform has been doing is to run these practice labs that focus on specific learning questions that are relevant to both programming and practice. It's an opportunity where practitioners come together and have really open and honest discussions about best practices, what works, what doesn't work, why does it not work, and so on and so forth. And the idea is to really try and inspire and inform and create that culture of learning and promote that uptake of learning. We're really interested in hearing from everyone in this group right now to use the next few minutes to try and hear from you what are the topics or themes that are of interest to this community. What should we be exploring as possible topics for practice labs? Again, raise your hand. You can also wave. As Marco said, sometimes I notice the waving better than the tiny little hand symbol. And then I will call on you to unmute yourself, but also feel free to use the chat function so that we don't miss any of these important topics that we could circle back in the coming weeks and months. So what are the topics or themes that is of interest to you that we can include in the practice labs in the future?
Andres, I see
Andres,
your hand.
yes, yes, I can see. Thanks, Megan.
In my opinion, I think something interesting to discuss in the future was related with innovation, particularly the data that we actually collect from the field in issues related to security mostly. So I would say that it will be a priority, and as well how to establish networks for influencing and advocacy efforts jointly, between the different organizations implementing programs more or less on the same programmatic areas, have a more joint advocacy and influencing agenda towards MFA and towards other regional as well institutions in Africa or in Asia. Thank you.
Anyone else? Again, please feel free to use the chat function as well. Any other topics that is of interest? Lisa.
Thanks, Vera. I would be interested in maybe a conversation around the role of rule of law programming within, what do we call them? Foreign offices, foreign affairs departments. I think around the world we've seen a number of aid departments integrated back into foreign affairs departments in Canada, Australia, the UK. And I think we've talked a lot about the securitization of justice programming. I'm now quite interested in the politicization of it, not to suggest that it wasn't political beforehand, but certainly in a number of contexts where I've worked, we're seeing a lot stronger foreign policy goals attached to rule of law programming. And I think that would be something really interesting to reflect on, where that, I'll leave it broadly at that, yeah.
It's a very important point, something that the wider community should be probably taking some time to reflect on. I've seen Samira drop a question theme in the chat box to tell you that we've noticed that. Anyone else?
I am seeing a
So
couple
I see-
additions in the chat. Oh, sorry, Sarita, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I was going to say that we are seeing a few more comments in the chat box from Michael Warren and Samira on inclusiveness and building on what Andre said on sort of a more broader common learning agenda. It looks like we don't have any other suggestions, topics. It was really an opportunity to try and brainstorm and sort of collect a few ideas that we could probably ponder on later on. So if there's any more, please continue to drop them in the chat. But other than that, I would like to take the opportunity to thank Mariska, Marco, and Madeline. Also for Megan for being the tech group, managing all of it amidst all the other things that she is doing, holding down the fort. So thank you so much for lending your support in this session as well. And thank you to all of you for coming to this session and sharing your insights, which is certainly most helpful for us in thinking about how we take the platform to its new phase in the new year. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you, Sarita. Yeah, thank you for moderating.
Yeah, thanks to everyone for coming.
Thanks, everyone. The contributions are really valuable.
Indeed.
Thank you.
See you all soon, I hope.
See you in the other sessions.